finally decided to get this one done. Before we start, I already made a ranking of Season 1, so if you haven't already, go check it out, yada yada yada. Anyway, I think the reason that I took so long on this one was because I was intimidated by the high episode count. Season 2 has a lot of episodes, and my point still stands from my Season 1 ranking that this is where the show started to go from good to great. There are a ton of standout episodes, moments, and more. Season 2 had a huge impact on a lot of people, and it's where Death Battle started to get more in the eye of the public image. For better or for worse. Death Battle started taking their work a lot more seriously, which means that there's a lot more care and thought put into each episode. Most of them, at least. Lots of episodes got pushed around to make them the best they could, which means that some of those unlucky episodes were not able to be fully realized. The show was still really young at this point, so they still hadn't quite figured out what they were wanting to do with the series, so things got confusing. Despite that, however, they were able to keep their footing throughout it, and helped make some of the most memorable moments and episodes of this show's entire run. But for every few bangers this season has, there are some that aren't that, and we'll just have to see which ones. Dilly-dallying no further, let's get to the ranking.
Not gonna lie, Wiz.
And welcome to Rogue vs. Wonder Woman 2, everybody. Granted, it's not as bad as that episode, and the Boomstick jokes aren't as terrible, but that doesn't really make it good. I don't really want to get into all that stuff though, so without that, yeah, it's terrible. I always forget about it. It is easily one of the most least interesting ones on the show, that's for sure. I didn't even remember who won until I rewatched the fight. And it doesn't help that the setting for the fight is the very interesting location of the middle of absolutely nowhere. It's not all bad. I think the death is funny. Sometimes the action can be pretty interesting, and yeah.
Beast did not actually lift the whole 60+ ton tree off the ground.
Call me basic, but yeah, this one sucks. Hey guys, let's make an episode with two characters who have a similar personality connection and make their personality representations in the fight completely different from how they usually are. I gotta give credit where credit's due. I heard the animator had a very limited amount of time to make this, but I mean, the script still had to be written this way. This is one of the shortest animations in the show. Not quite the shortest in the show or even the season, but it's up there. And that means they have to rush a lot. Which also means that our heroes don't get the time to think, plan things out, and try to use their brain and strategy to win. You know, like the main reason they got pitted together. These two could have just been replaced by two other animalistic beings, and it would have fit just fine. The only time you could say strategy was involved is when Beast chucks the car at Goliath. And I mean, does that really count? At least the death is cool, though out of character, and at least the analyses are nothing awful, though those clips mess with the pacing a lot. This episode is also home to the infamous Golden Tree feat, and I don't think I need to explain why it's stupid. I definitely see why so many people hate this one. I know it got the short end of the stick, as it got stuck between two of the best episodes of the season, and show for that matter, but that doesn't excuse its quality.
What did you expect?
Honestly, what else can I say about Batman vs. Captain America that hasn't already been said about a million times by now? The episode is just nothing. The matchup is weird, the analyses have almost nothing worth mentioning, and that also goes for the animation. It's not badly done, just boring. Though I guess you can still see Cap's arm in this shot, so that's an oversight there. Cap throwing the shield and keeping the same expression on his face even after Batman throws the shield back looks stupid. The death is ironically hilarious with how Batman just absolutely launches Cap and how sudden the killing blow is. Though it isn't as hilarious as Wiz just straight up calling Boomstick an idiot. That always gets a laugh out of me. The smoke bomb, I gotta admit, adds some nice tension. I like both the characters and think their designs mesh well together, so there's that, I guess. That's really all I got.
What's up, guys? I'm Toff.
You can't see me, and I can't see you, but that doesn't mean I'm not gonna kick your butt.
Gara vs. Toff is an episode I really want to like, but I just don't. Toff is one of my favorite characters from one of my favorite shows, and while I don't care too much for Gara, I do find him to be an interesting character. But this episode is pretty infamous around the death battle community, and it's obvious why. Nothing in the whole episode is outrageous or anything. The analyses I actually find quite good, if I'm being honest. It's just the fight. It's bad. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. It's just bad. Slow action, the dialogue can be repetitive, and the effects are just not it. There are some bending and sand attacks that look cool, but most of the time it's just rocks, sand, and a bunch of rock breaking sound effects to go along with it. Also, the death is super confusing, as you all know, with how it looks super bloody and gory off screen, but Gara looks completely the same as he was before. Literally all they had to do was not show the body and they would have been fine. Not much else to say. I hope both characters get a second shot in an episode one day, though please don't make it a rematch.
Well, there goes the year of Luigi.
Okay, I'm gonna be completely honest. I think I was too harsh on this episode when I talked about it in my Mario ranking. Obviously, it's still not good, but I think I let bias get the best of me when I wrote that. I feel like I was just whining about it. So, let's just go back into this episode with an open mind. Oh yeah, it's definitely still bad, but I feel like I based a majority of my criticisms on Luigi getting very little respect, and yeah, that still stands, but it doesn't piss me off as much as it did before. Of course, the fight feeling unfair makes it very uninteresting. Luigi puts so much effort into his attacks, but they basically do nothing to Tails. He really only is able to get like one good hit in, and only stays on equal footing with Tails during a few points in the fight. The rest of the time, Tails absolutely dominates, so it's really just an animation of a guy getting his ass handed to him and then die. And the conclusion was also very badly done. I think the analyses themselves are perfectly fine, but the post-analysis is one of the most poorly written ones of the entire show. They convinced me of the opposite result. And they were using Archie Tails. This should have been easy. The radish argument is stupid, as you all know, and Luigi doesn't really get any sort of advantage if I'm remembering correctly. I'm not calling Death Battle biased for this, by the way. This was just a very big problem that Season 2 had, making it seem like they favored one series or character heavily, even if that isn't the case. And this episode, I feel, is one of the worst examples of it. But we'll get to some of the others in just a bit. Anyways, the episode itself isn't necessarily good, but I don't really despise it like I used to. Analyses are alright, and the animation itself still can be pretty good at points. There are far worse episodes out there. Let's just hope my boy Luigi gets another chance, and that Tails does as well. Both deserve a lot better.
Well, F-U-C-K, space, Y-O-U, I'm out!
Ragna vs. Soul Bad Guy is such a weird entity. Apparently there's a lot of controversy surrounding the treatment of BlazBlue throughout the episode, and how there's some dislike to it throughout the crew, and that is made pretty obvious by the post-fight scene. I don't know a whole lot about the situation though, and because of that, this episode is kinda boring. It's hard for me to remember any notable moments in the episode, except for the That Man argument. That is one of the best Wiz and Boomstick moments in the entire show, and I never get tired of it. Maybe it's because I'm not too interested in either series, so I don't get anything out of this episode if I'm being completely honest. Maybe Potato King would have a lot to say on it, given that he's a huge fighting game fan, but to me, everything is just fine. Animation can be fun, and so can the analyses, but it is far from perfect. Looking at those random anime cuts, and at the end, we get ready for this huge epic battle between these two super forms, but just one sword swing and it's over. Yippee. There's also a lot of problems with how the analysis was handled, especially for Ragna, and the fight really doesn't have too much to it. It's basically just a lot of fighting game combos and then Ragna dies. Anyways, to me it's just fine.
But that was simply because of the running gag I have on my channel, where Yang always dies.
Oh boy. this one. Quite the controversial episode. And I gotta say, bias is definitely not the right word for this, but this is when Rooster Teeth had just been getting close with Death Battle, so stuff like the Ruby Volume 3 poster hanging over Tifa's corpse and Boomstick talking about how cool the world of Remnant is, while Tifa doesn't really get much in terms of that, doesn't really paint the best picture for them. Yang didn't dominate the whole fight. Tifa was able to hold her own, but it isn't just the obvious that makes me not really like this episode. The effects and choreography aren't really that good. Not bad, but there has been a lot better this season, and that kinda sucks given that this was one of the last few episodes of the season. The voice acting also kinda sucks for both parties. The models look terrible, especially the hair. I do like the limit break combo. Yang's song playing is pretty cool, the mirror shot is awesome, and I like the death in concept. I know it's hard to make that kill look accurate without making it look awkward as hell, but still. At least it's interesting. Nothing quite stands out as truly awful in this episode, but at best, it's mediocre, and I do really think that other episodes are better, despite the blatant flaw that everyone likes to point out.
You underestimate my rower, Raggy.
I remember when I was little, I would watch this episode over and over again, and honestly, I don't know why. I wasn't really a fan of Marvel or Star Wars back then, and looking back on the episode, the analyses are okay. Kind of has the same problem as Beast vs. Goliath, where they use random clips that mess with the pacing and stuff, except where Beast vs. Goliath had like one each that was really long. This episode has them littered throughout the analyses. I like these two characters, so I find them enjoyable, but sometimes it's just a bit much, you know? Then there's the fight, which is also fine. Everything in the Death Star is pretty good, except for the fact that you can't see Vader the whole time. But I really like how Vader uses the Force in this shot. When we get to the dinosaur planet, though, is when things start to get a lot more clear on why people don't like this animation. They could hide how limited Vader's sprite was back in the Death Star, but here with all the bright colors, it is really hard to blame it on the background. Some of the things that Vader does here feel so physically out of character, and something that he probably shouldn't be able to do. One of the few times that Vader is actually able to hit Doom is when he's not paying attention. The climax is fun, but I feel like it could have lasted a bit longer because Doom just gets behind Vader once and then wins. The death is a nice callback, and yeah. Again, I'm super nostalgic for this episode, but there are a lot of flaws that are very hard to ignore.
Totally should have been Cyrax. What the hell?
Folgore vs. Sector. Yeah. I heard there was this huge thing going around with the cast and the crew of the show where they voted if they wanted to have Folgore fight Sector or Cyrax, and despite most of them choosing Cyrax, they decided to go with Sector anyway. And that is the most interesting thing to come out of Folgore vs. Sector. Now, I'm just gonna say, I think this episode gets too much hate. I'm not calling it a hidden masterpiece or whatever, because, well, it's not, but you get what I mean. People always dog on this episode, and personally, I don't really get all the backlash. Maybe it's because of the controversy, or maybe I'm just crazy and people don't hate it at all, who knows. Anyhow, this episode does have its flaws, but I think that adds to its overall charm. The animation, while janky and slow, isn't really that bad. I like how Folgore gradually charges up his reactor, the Saber Swords bit is a true spectacle, and Folgore holding up the Crusher is really badass. Unfortunately, it's followed by a pretty weak combo and kill, so the fight is not starved of cool moments, but like I said, the fight is pretty janky and slow. Folgore moves slower than Pyramid Head, and Sector is full of janked movements, especially him swinging on the lights. The rest of the episode is pretty alright, but nothing worth gawking over. It's practically an average episode. And honestly, that's a shame, because I feel like this matchup has a lot of potential. Like, imagine this as a Torian animated episode. Not a terrible episode, but far from amazing.
And Charizard, the dragon!
The Pokemon Battle Royale feels like a Season 1 episode, and I do not mean that in a bad way. just this kind of matchup and this kind of writing feels straight out of the first season. The analyses have this specific feel to them that I just can't quite pin down. The animation is nicely done, and it has this sort of personality to it that just oozes the charm of the previous season. Heck, the matchup itself feels like something so unique that Death Battle would never do again, like Bomberman vs. Dig Dug, for example. But enough on that. The episode overall is good. The analyses have this bit of coordination to them, and I like how they look at them through the eyes of Pokemon rather than versus. It's really cool. And you cannot forget about the Blastoise origin bit. That is just too iconic. They represent moves and typings well in the animation. Venusaur's death is sad, and Charizard's is okay. I love the backdrop for the final showdown being a rainstorm with a massive wildfire going on. It gives off a lot of tension and contrasts the two elements well. It's hard to believe that our last Battle Royale episode was over 4 years ago with the Mega Man Battle Royale. They're really fun. Let's hope we can get another one for Season 10 and onwards.
This is what Guts does every single day.
Like Vader vs. Doom, this is an episode I watched a lot of back in the day. And just like that example, I don't really know why. Because I didn't know anything about either character or their series. I at least knew what Star Wars and Marvel was. But anyways, this episode is pretty okay. I know there's this huge plot armor controversy, but honestly, I just find the whole situation hilarious. The fight itself can be pretty enjoyable, but the climax wasn't really the greatest. We got a fake out, and then Cinder from Killer Instinct shows up, does nothing, Guts goes into a super armor, does one attack, and then wins. How tense. The rigging can be pretty good, and both attacks have a lot of weight to them. And there are some pretty cool moments, like Guts jumping out of the fire, for example. Everything else is nothing special, though. You may be wondering why I put it not too far from the bottom. Well, this is another episode I feel gets too much hate. And it's one of those episodes where people give it so much flack for a single point in the analysis, fight, post-analysis, etc. This is basically another Folgore vs. Sector situation, where I like the episode all around and I'm far from hating it, but I wouldn't necessarily call it great. So yeah, I think it's pretty alright.
Flippy, what are you doing?
Fox vs. Bucky is a pretty niche episode, but a fun one nonetheless. You could tell they were trying their hardest to stretch out Bucky's analysis with the intro and how short it is despite them trying to lengthen it, but still the analyses as a whole are pretty good, and the fight similarly is very delightful. The beginning part adds some nice story context and a good reason for fighting, and I like how they're able to get some good character interaction in with the others because the two don't talk after this point. Some may say it's pointless, but it doesn't hurt anything in the animation, so I'm cool with it. The fight itself is really great. It's really well done. The ability and weapon play is really creative, and while Fox only really does use his smash moveset and Bucky's sprite is kinda blurry, I do get that they were kinda limited with these two. It's just a solid animation, but the ending is something that is able to give me chills every time. The dramatic music playing while Fox chokes Bucky before he delivers one last blow from his blaster, it's a kill that I really love, and one that I don't see enough people talking about. And that goes for this episode too.
Neither of us have reached our full potential.
Counterpoint. You're a terrorist.
Another solid one. Ryu vs. Scorpion is a good time. The choreography is lively, and I like the visuals. There are some bits that do stick out as confusing or awkward, like the death. The fake out part of it is cool, but Ryu just sitting there awaiting his demise is not. The X-ray could have been saved for something more dramatic. It's just randomly used and forgotten about. And I feel like the power of nothingness was kind of brushed over. Scorpion just kind of walks towards it and gets disintegrated. Everything else is pretty good. Kind of a shame I don't have a whole lot to say on this one because I do like it. It's just I don't have much to comment on. Just, I think it's a well animated and well done fight. So, this one is kind of weird since it's only supposed to be a remaster, not a remake. But by definition, it is a remake given that they redo everything from the ground up without really changing much. I won't get too far into it. This was made as a tribute to the late Monsieur, who was a huge inspiration for not only verses, but for animation as a whole. He was behind the really popular Haloid and Ruby, so it was really great that they did this for him. Unfortunately, that doesn't exempt it from criticisms, but fortunately, it's pretty good. Like I said, it was just a retread of an already existing episode, but they do go over new stuff in the analyses, and the animation has a new 3D fresh coat of paint. With this, they are really able to get way more crazy with their weapons than how they were in the first episode of the show. The original animators have grown in talent, and new ones have been hired. It was a great way to show everyone how much they have grown throughout the few-year run at the time. Not much to say specifically, it's just an amped up Boba versus Samus. I do love Boba sneaking the bomb under Samus, which causes her armor to break. Although, it is kind of weird that the only places that seemed to be affected were her arms and legs and not the place closest to the explosion. But I digress. The kill, I'm gonna be honest, I think had more impact in the original. It's still good here, but I don't know, something about the first one makes it a bit more satisfactory. Maybe it's because it's the first ever kill on the show, but who knows. There are some other flaws, but as a whole, this was a great way to pay homage to such an influential person in this community. The tribute at the end of the episode was really great. Maybe someday we could get Samus vs. Master Chief to commemorate how big Haloid was to versus and web animation.
Who do I truly think would win between Goku and Superman? My answer is it doesn't matter because Donkey Kong and fucked them both up in a 2v1!
I'm conflicted with Goku vs. Superman 2. I like it, but there are plenty of things that make it very controversial for me. Mainly with how they talk about Superman. They do say plenty of times that Superman is the beacon of hope for many different people, but that's really the most they say. They don't really talk about why he's such a good hero and character. Sometimes they just flat out call him boring. And they have this whole spiel on what makes Goku so great. And the thing is, they do this today too. I don't know if Dragon Ball fans are that bad, but they constantly need to reaffirm that Goku is this really awesome character. And like, yeah, I'm not saying he isn't, but I don't know, it's weird. Everything else is pretty okay. Of course the animation is solid and good looking. I like that the analyses go over the history of the matchup. That was a nice change from the rest of the analyses this season. The original track is awesome. I love Superman walking through the Kamehameha, and Superman is characterized very well. He is really well represented here, I'll give him that. The killing blow is also pretty unique. While the first one had them go over the top and give off one of the most destructive blows in death battle history, this one goes for a more somber and calm kill. And it makes sense because this one canonically happens after the first, which is something that doesn't really happen a lot with death battle. The characters even talk about how this is the second time they fought. I really like it when death battles have connections to older episodes, you know? It's neat. But I guess because of that, the two don't really feel like using any of their unique moves against each other, so they really only use punches throughout the fights, besides lasers and whatnot. And yes, the actual fighting is really great and choreographed immaculately, but when the first used pretty much everything in their arsenal up to that point, it makes this one a little bit bare. My only real problem is that I feel like this happened too soon. Goku vs. Superman, the first, was the 25th episode of the show. This was the 50th. And Goku had only just gotten his new form. I feel like they only made this out of obligation. It wasn't something they actually wanted to do. Now, because of this, do I feel that Goku vs. Superman 3 is unnecessary? Well, yeah, obviously. But to be honest, I wouldn't mind if they did it. I doubt it would even come close to how good the first one was, but it's something I wouldn't mind seeing, despite thinking both have better opponents.
What are you doing? We're not supposed to fight!
Season finales are a big thing for Death Battle, and for a season this big and ambitious, you'd imagine that the finale would be this huge, amazing, thrilling episode, and we got that. Pokemon vs. Digimon is far from the grandest thing to come out of Season 2, but it didn't really need to be. This is just a fun episode to cap off the season. Anyways, however, getting to talk about the episode itself, Everyone always brings up how they compare Pokemon to slaves, and yeah, that is kinda risky, but it's not something that ruins the episode for me. The animation does have a few problems in of itself, like the models really clashing with the environment, especially with this shot here. It's mostly thanks to these outlines also present in Yang vs. Tifa. I'm glad they got rid of them in future episodes. But all around, good job. I like how Red tries to treat everything like a Pokemon battle. Like when he says that the trainers aren't supposed to fight when Tai starts fighting on his own terms with Red, and when he throws Pokeballs at Agumon and Greymon. I find the beginning and first part of the fight with Charizard and Agumon pretty funny. The Mega Evolution is sick as hell, as well as the final attack. Yeah, there's a lot I like. Of course, the death was really sad and killed a lot of people's childhood, I bet. I didn't really grow up with Pokemon, I never really got into it until my middle school years, but even this got me a little bit crushed as a kid. But besides all that, I still think this was a good way to bring Season 2 to a close. By far not the best finale we've gotten, but it still holds up.
The fuck you say to me,
I don't have a whole awful lot to say about Ryu vs. Strider, but just know that I really like it. The action is intense and so is the energy. The two play off each other really well, and the fight never slows down. They're always swinging swords swiftly, jumping around, and using abilities one after the other in very quick succession. Ryu especially gets to use a lot, as Strider doesn't really have as much as him, but because of that, we get to see Strider counter them in really unique ways. And like I said, it doesn't slow down. Things are happening constantly. It is also home to one of the best, if not the best, one-stroke duels in the show. It allows ample time to keep suspense on who won, and allows time after for Strider to deliver a more satisfying killing blow. It is rough around the edges. This was the third episode of the season, but Ryu vs. Strider is a very solid episode when looking at it through the big picture.
Hey, Mega Man! You're a little low on the air!
And you're full of
Mega Man vs. Astro Boy is a great time. The analyses are fun, for the most part that is, and I really like the fight. They use a ton of Mega Man's weapons without making it feel cluttered at all, and they use them in unique ways too. Astro Boy also gets a good amount to work with. I heard that like Beast vs. Goliath, the animator had a very limited amount of time to make this, and I'm not sure if that's true or not, but I'm having a pretty hard time believing it is. The animation is incredibly well done. I'd argue it's one of the nicest looking sprite fights this season. The sprite work and background are really colorful, and the movements are extremely fluid. If this was really made in a really short amount of time, I'm very impressed. It gets pretty intense, from the Hornet Chase, the Black Hole, and the finale, though the death is really lame. There are some moments to breathe too. It's not just constant high-octane energy all the time. Also, Mega Man's in clip is just random as hell, and I love it. I hear it's a reference to a video, but without me knowing about it, it's still hilarious. Especially with the edited silence after. That was just pure gold right there. It's not really that deep of an episode, but I still really like it nonetheless.
Master Bison, he's our hero, gonna take pollution down to zero.
How is it that both Akuma and Shao Kahn's better episodes were both the second episodes of the first and second season, and not one of the final episodes of Season 8? M. Bison vs. Shao Kahn isn't a fantastic episode, but for what it is, it's pretty great. They were really able to make these Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat sprites work together. Both of their models, despite being so different, are able to clash, but yet still stay on the same terms with each other. It's really great. I like how they're also able to show the differences between the two, from how they kill the two combatants at the start, and how their hits land, with Bison's hitting rapidly and in combos, and with Shao Kahn's hitting with massive force that sends Bison flying. Each one of his hits has so much impact, such as the shoulder bashes, despite it being a little repetitive. Shao Kahn has plenty of distinctive moments, like when he's stuck in Bison's combo but is slowly able to counter more and more over time. The kill where he slams his hammer on Bison over and over again before ripping it in half in brutal Mortal Kombat fashion. And then he also eats his soul or whatever, I guess. And he even gets to show part of his arrogance when he gets distracted and taunts, which gives M. Bison a chance to counterattack. However, that basically means that M. Bison doesn't get many moments to shine. It's practically the Shao Kahn show here. But considering everything else, this is a pretty averagely good one. Oh, and you can't forget about the alternate ending.
What? Okay, so it's broken. I guess I'll just magic it back together.
HeMan vs. Lionel is a pretty good premiere. Of course, it had a lot of weight under its belt after that amazing Season 1 finale, but I feel like it did its job perfectly here. Just good and fun enough to make you excited for the rest of the season, and to give you expectations for what you can expect to see. I like how the fight is just full of 80s cheesiness, and it's very amusing. Both characters feel like they come straight out of a cartoon from that era. The dialogue and even voice acting represents that well. I love stuff like HeMan chucking Battle Cat up into the sky to get him out of the arena, and even having him return completely fine after the fight. Though admittedly, it is kind of weird that's what they decided to do with him in the fight when they spent a pretty good portion in the analysis talking about him. But whatever, that's made up for HeMan chucking an entire mountain at Lionel, which makes for such a booming and impactful moment. It's just an endearing fight. The death leaves a little bit to be desired, and the scene with the Eye of Thundera is kinda vague and confusing, but it's not hurting anyone, I guess. Except for Lionel, and presumably the entire Thundercat race. Also, I can't forget to mention Boomstick freaking out about HeMan repairing that chain. That's one of my favorite Boomstick moments, personally. This was a pretty good way to get the season rolling out. It's a solid episode with a lot of charm.
I'll break your face!
Tiger Zord vs. Gundam Epion is a surprisingly very comedic episode played for laughs for a supposedly serious matchup like this. But hey, I'm not complaining. It is genuinely a pretty funny episode. I don't care for the analyses a whole lot. They're not bad, I just don't get a whole lot out of them. But the fight is pretty good. The main source of comedy is easily the White Ranger and Saba, from them being baffled that Epion didn't explode, the entirety of the setup, Saba screaming, "Son of a bitch!" and all the 90s-ness charm that the two just radiate. Zex only really gets 1 point of comedic value with a part in the beginning with a joke about him being broody. The rest of the fight, he stays pretty consistently serious. But that really adds to stuff like Epion's introduction and the precognition that they have about the Mega Tiger Zord. The action isn't a second thought either. Both are pretty quick and hits feel impactful. It's actually really well done. The kill is also really good, helped by that death scream by Chris. God, that gives me chills. All three voice actors do an incredible job, I gotta say. Doug plays the part of Saba perfectly and helps bring every single one of his lines so much life. And Stewart does well as Zex, being able to really pull off a load of different emotions with him. Tommy and Tiger Zord's sprites are kind of blurry, but I can't really think of any other specific problems with the episode I have. And even then, it's not that huge a deal. So yeah, all around, I like it. This is one of the Torian greats, one of those 5 to 7 minute long epic story-like fights. There were a few of those this season, and while I personally think that this is the weakest out of those, that should say something when it's ranked 11th out of 32. Anyway, just to get negatives out of the way first, audio feels off at points. I know these are robots, but things feel a bit too jagged and stiff. And finally, I don't know if it's a reference to something in the Terminator series or anything, but Terminator's
"Fuck you, dickwad"
happens way too quick, and it honestly made me laugh when I heard it while rewatching this. And those are my only major problems with it. The rest of it is really, really great. I like how the two play off each other combat and banter-wise. I like the kill with Terminator promising that he will return, and the very beginning where the two are walking towards the other, repeatedly shooting at the other and not even reacting to it. Both analyses are also really good. I love it when analyses are able to balance out verses with story stuff, and while this one isn't necessarily one of the best examples of that, in its own right, I think it does a really great job analyzing these characters. Yeah, it's a satisfactory episode.
Boomstick, I think the loser is us.
It's really sad that we don't get these kind of episodes much anymore, because they're ridiculously entertaining. I hope the consensus on Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man doesn't affect the possibility of us getting these types of matchups. But anyways, back to this episode, Chuck Norris vs. Segata Sanshiro is genuinely a really endearing time. I love the analyses a lot, basically just because of how surreal and fever dreamish it is. And it's part of the reason people love this episode and despise Beaver vs. Black, as that episode was practically just cyberbullying two real teenage singers throughout the entire thing, while this episode hypes up the fictional versions of real people. And the animation represents that too, constantly doing these crazy things and amping it up by the second. And unlike another really destructive episode, this one actually knows how pacing works. Not deciding a victor and just saying that they keep on fighting throughout different dimensions is kind of lame, but at least it makes sense for these characters, and given the reception of the aforementioned Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man, I don't blame them for wanting to keep it ambiguous. The constellation served as a very big callback to the episode. It was even referenced in future episodes all the way until Season 8 when the Macho Man vs. Kool-Aid Man constellation took over. Such a fun time, and a good one at that. Sometimes, it's just nice to watch something like this, you know?
10.
If I had to pick an episode that I think was the most underrated of the season, it would be this one. It's no hidden gem, but it's still really fun. I genuinely really love both analyses. I like them going over all the crazy stuff they have done with their trick arrows and such, and the way they covered their origins was something I really admired, and the Nick cameo was really funny. The fight follows through with this by having a really fun animation take place. The way they use their trick arrows are creative and funny too, especially with how they're able to counter each other, like how Oliver uses the tornado arrow to divert Hawkeye's massive bombard of arrows, for example. And also, I'm pretty sure there aren't any voice actors in this one, but the voice clips they use really fit. Obviously, it's not a perfect episode. There are some flaws that make it far from one of the best, like the death. Hawkeye splitting Oliver's arrow is cool, but after we have like 4 straight seconds of the two just standing there before Oliver remembers that he has to die as if he had forgotten to do so, like he was in a stage play or something. I don't know if they were trying to make it suspenseful. We already saw Oliver's arrow break, and we didn't see the arrow hit him either. It's as if neither's arrow was able to make it to their opponent, but Oliver just ended up exploding anyway, so there you go, the winner is Hawkeye. I know I had a bit to say on that, but it just really confused me. Still, most of it is very entertaining. Also, Hawkeye just straight up stole his girl. Like, you already killed him, dude. Why do you have to go the extra mile and do that?
Surprise, bitches! Brrr!
I really want Death Battle to do more kaiju/giant fights, because the few we have gotten have all been great, and this is no exception. I adore the analysis portions here, except for the you-know-what joke I'm talking about in Gamera's one. That was kinda iffy, not gonna lie, Wiz. But the fight, though, now that's something amazing right there. People bring up the jank a lot, and yeah, I'm not gonna pretend that it doesn't exist, but these two are meant to be giant, slow-moving monsters, so for me, it gets a pass. Barely. As for other talks of the episode, the music helps add a lot to the beginning fight and the scene when Gamera flies Godzilla all the way to space. Everything has so much impact from both characters. Each fire and radiation blast gives off such a big boom. Perfect for these two. The city is able to give some scaling to their sheer height, especially when Gamera throws a building at Godzilla. We are even able to get some fast-paced moments too, surprisingly. Well, fast-paced for these two at least. With Gamera flying all around dodging the radiation lasers, or flying Godzilla out of the atmosphere to put himself at the advantage. And the kill is so good. Godzilla's comeback is raw as hell, and Godzilla's laser penetrating through Gamera's shell and the explosion that follows after just have so much weight to it. Now, after they leave the city, there's nothing really to compare them to, so after that, we weren't really able to truly feel how big they are. And again, jank is pretty prominent, so it's not without flaws, but I still really love it. I hope Death Battle stops slacking on kaiju soon enough. There's a lot of good ones just waiting to get on the show.
Super Saiyan God Goku, he's my best friend.
Hey look, it's Capsirus' least favorite episode. Okay, in all seriousness, like Capsirus, I also really like Kirby vs. Majin Buu. Now, he did make his own dedicated video to this episode, so I'd recommend you go watch that if you want to see someone go really in depth. But for my thoughts, I like both analyses, but I think they lean too far into Kirby being a bloodthirsty monster when he's not. He's Kirby, for crying out loud. But I still like them. The fight is also really fun. It's really fast, really intense, and also kind of funny. Kirby vs. Fat Buu makes for most of the comedic moments, especially with the hand-drawn facial expressions that Kirby and some of the enemies make, despite them looking a little bit off-putting. Things start amping up whenever Kid Buu comes out. I heard that the way he appears isn't accurate to how he does in the series, but even then, his introduction when he leaves Kirby's stomach dimension, or whatever it's called, is something I love. The music playing in the background, the sound effects, and the visuals make it such an intense way to come back. And him absolutely walloping on Kirby shows how much of a bigger threat he is to the pink puffball compared to the Buu he faced earlier. Kirby using Fighter to block some of his attacks is one of my favorite moments in the fight. Speaking of, Kirby gets to use a good variety of copy abilities. Not to the same extent as Mega Man gets to use his, but hey, we get to see him use the Star Rod and Hypernova, which he gets in moments of need. And these both make really good comebacks for Kirby. Like with how he uses the Hypernova, by inhaling the energy ball that Buu just hurled at him and returning it to Cinder. And it gives Buu a one-way ticket to the sun. And then Kirby becomes the sun, because he's Kirby. There's plenty wrong with this episode. Capsirus elaborates further on those, but something I think he didn't mention was this. This looks like a transition made last minute. This is just two layer masks put on a timeline next to each other. If Cap did talk about that though, well then I said it here too, you're gonna have to deal with it. Oh, and the post-analysis is fine too. But overall, I love this one a lot. It's a fun time. Oh yeah, and the Funko Pop ad is just great.
And the moral of the story is...
Of course, Madara won!
The start of the Deadpool trilogy. And while it is a tough race between this and Deadpool vs. The Mask, this is where I personally think he peaked on Death Battle. Deadpool vs. Deathstroke feels special in its own way. It's not a huge milestone episode or a death battle different from the rest. It's basically just a regular episode with a third host. But something about the fight and all the fourth wall breaking make it feel so big. Like I said, the analyses are practically normal besides the fact that Deadpool will butt in every once in a while. And the fight, while it doesn't go crazy as the next two animations Deadpool fought in with all the fourth wall breaking, there are still points where he does it and it's pretty funny. Personally, I don't think he gets too obnoxious later in the series like a lot of people says he does, but I do like that they keep him toned down here. But even then, he's still able to go crazy, like we all know and love. Especially for that disco dance scene which Torian made while he was drunk. And that's just a thing that seems to happen with Death Battle animators, because later down the line, Luis got intoxicated and then proceeded to make Samurai Jack vs. Afro Samurai as part of a bet he made while drunk. Back on topic, however, I love the interactions the two have. I love it when a big, tough, and serious guy gets to play off a huge goofball. So seeing the cold-hearted assassin that is Deathstroke play off against Deadpool of all people is comedy gold. The choreography is great as per usual with Torian fights, and the intensity on the bridge is great. I really only have a couple big problems with it. First off, the kill itself isn't that good. The little gag after is fine, but an off-screen janky sword slice doesn't really do much for me. And secondly, the audio feels kind of off at points. I'm not sure if that's just a me thing, but things feel a bit too loud and the mic quality doesn't seem consistent. That may just be me remembering things wrong though. I might have to rewatch it. But it's number 6 for a reason. I still really love this episode.
Oh, man!
Hercule vs. Dan is just dumb fun, and that is entirely the reason why I love it so much. Is it my favorite Dragon Ball episode? Nah. I think Goku Black vs. Reverse Flash or Trunks vs. Silver might have taken that honor. But nevertheless, I love this episode a lot. The analyses are really enjoyable. They didn't have a ton to work off of with these two, so I'm glad that they went for the full extent of what they've done while simultaneously being able to talk about how bad they are at what they do while also being respectful. Take notes, Michelangelo's analysis. And the fight is one of the most fun and funny ones of the show. From the slow action at the beginning, to Hercule trying to play off everything as cool, Hercule freaking out over Dan's attack thinking it's a Kamehameha, Dan's taunt, and pretty much everything with the capsules. I really like the delivery of,
well, that's disappointing,
from Brad Venable, and Dan flying around with the jetpack uncontrollably. Speaking of Brad, he absolutely stole the show as Dan here. Every single delivery perfectly fits the spirit of Hibiki, and I definitely wasn't prepared for the performance of the Satsui no Hado. I was not expecting them to make Dan Hibiki, of all people, genuinely terrifying, but here we are. And the death is hilarious. Again, Dan's delivery is perfect for that. And the announcer still thinking that Hercule did it was just the cherry on top for that. Now, Death Battle, I'm gonna ask you one last time, where is the Hercule vs. Asta announcement?
You know, Amy, anytime someone calls attention to the breaking of gender roles, it ultimately undermines the concept of gender equality by implying that this is an exception and not the status quo.
I said a good amount on this episode in my Mario ranking, and despite me disagreeing with many things I said in that video, I still mostly agree with it. And that includes pretty much all of my thoughts on DK vs. Knuckles. I'm not gonna go make you rewatch that though, so let's talk about it again. The analyses here feel unique, and honestly I don't know why. Both just have this specific feel to them which I really admire. And that goes for the animation too. But in contrast to the analyses, I know exactly why I love this fight so much. It feels exactly like a cartoon. They use the two perfectly. Both are brash and naive, but still pack a hella punch when they need to. They feel exactly like they're doing their respective games. The rigging is also surprisingly good. The two move really fluidly. The fight is filled with so many funny moments too. The reason they fight, the oh no gag, Knuckles tunneling under DK, and a lot more. The climax also gets pretty intense. The two clinging onto the wall, working together trying to punch their way out of the situation is surprisingly dramatic. The death is also really impactful, although I don't know why they bothered with the fake out, as we clearly saw Knuckles splattered. And also, I know it fits really well with the animation and that it's very expressive, but god, is DK's model not cursed as hell. I love this one. Wario vs. Dedede is still my favorite Mario death battle, but make no mistake, it's a very close race, and it makes for one of my favorite episodes this season. And spoilers in case you're good at process of elimination, but that makes this my favorite sprite fight of the season. So, anyways, let's get to the top 3.
I'm not playing God. All this time, I've been playing human.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
Iron Man vs. Lex Luthor has a lot to it. I really like both's characterization. Stark truly has his controlled arrogance, and Lex feels like a huge egomaniac. And while I really do like Lex vs. Doom, I have to admit his character is done a lot better here. I love all the references they make to other series in the first part of the fight, especially the one with the Batmobile. I also really like Jarvis in this fight too. He has some really great banter with Tony, like when he's calculating the cost of the things he destroys, or when he answers Pepper's call despite Tony saying not to. The banter in general is really good, and that means the writing is good as well. I especially really love Lex's speech on playing God, which leads into one of the most badass moments in the whole series. I've been playing human makes for one of the best comebacks in the show's history. He was able to stay on the same pace with Lex, but he's been struggling the whole fight. He's been keeping his cool throughout the whole thing, always able to make a snappy comeback on the fly, but Lex has always been one step ahead. Even the Hulkbuster was barely able to take the advantage. And worse yet, he ran out of power too. The cards seemed against him, but despite all odds, he's still going, claiming that he hasn't even been going all out. And the way he gives Lex one final beatdown before finishing him off for good is so satisfying. And yes, while the death is just an incineration kill, the way it's voice acted and animated makes it have so much impact. It makes it feel like it hurts. God, Torian was so good at making these fights. And it's only number 3. It's not even my favorite of his this season. Again, spoilers, but come on, what else were you expecting?
Well, my bones are covered in the strongest metal around. Does that count?
Its design is rather ingenious. Not as ingenious as mine, of course.
Oh my god, I love this episode. Wolverine vs. Raiden is one of the most fast-paced, action-filled fights of the series. And unlike some where it's hard to keep up, this one allows the viewers to stay on the same pace without slowing down or giving out headaches. It was really hard to choose between this and number 1 for which I'd place where, but I ended up going up with this for the number 2 spot. I'll go ahead and get my negatives out of the way, and despite how much I adore this episode, there are quite a few. First off, the end of Wolverine's analysis. I love his analysis as a whole, but it ended out of nowhere. I've said that analyses such as Jason Voorhees' one, for example, had abrupt endings, but at least the likes of those had actual closers that tell you it's about to end. This just ends while Wiz is in the middle of talking about one of Wolverine's traits. Even Raiden had a proper conclusion, so I don't know what was going on there. There are some parts of the animation that look a little awkward, such as Wolverine climbing up the building, for example. Even I still think it looks good, just awkward. And some of the things that Wolverine says just feel a bit much. Like the infamous line about his bones being coated in the strongest metal around. Does that count? So yeah, plenty of flaws, but that doesn't stop me from adoring this episode. I could rewatch the fight over and over again. There's just so much going on and a ton of energy. Both voice actors do great. Wolverine's regeneration effect looks cool. Raiden going into Ripper mode is awesome. And the death is really cool and also really shocking at the same time, as pretty much everyone was expecting Wolverine to take it very easily. Heck, even the team didn't want to do this one in the first place because they thought it would be a massive stomp in Wolverine's favor. The post-analysis does a pretty good job explaining how Raiden's able to counter the adamantium skeleton. And finally, EXO. The original track for this fight is so freaking good. And it sounds even better when it's backing up the fight. This is a fight I wish would come out today just so I can react to it for the first time again. Because, like I said in my Season 9 ranking about Trunks vs. Silver, pure hype is something that we go crazy for. And I just know that we would go nuts over this one if we saw it for the first time again. And like I said in that video, I love it when death battles are just able to be fun, action-packed experiences. I always love a good story-driven or emotional fight, but sometimes I just want to watch two people absolutely go at it, and that is why I love Wolverine vs. Raiden. But speaking of those story-driven, emotional fights I was just talking about, let's get to number 1.
You're pretty good.
You're pretty good.
Again, call me basic, but there's a reason why this is at the top of basically everyone's list. Solid Snake vs. Sam Fisher is everything that a great episode of Death Battle should be. Fun analyses, good interactions, excellent action, cinematography and choreography, accurate and great use of characters' personalities and abilities, intense and suspenseful moments, good setup and plot. This one has it all. Now, of course you don't need all of these things to be an excellent episode, but in this case, they hit pretty much every single beat, and they do it all nearly to perfection. This episode isn't all just drama either. The episode knows when to be comedic instead of just being gloom and doom all the time. From the part where they notice each other for the first time, and the whole spiel with the cardboard box, it isn't dry of comedic moments. My favorite part about the fight though is how they utilize stealth. From the aforementioned gag with the box, Sam crawling through the vent, and more. The fight focuses on this piece of data that both are trying to get, which adds a lot of tension as there is more going on than just winning the fight. Even Otacon and Grimm get in on the action by helping their respective combatants out, and Grimm's death with Otacon hacking into her system makes for a really dramatic moment. as now the lights start going out in the building and Divine Identity from Shin Megami Tensei starts playing, and man, this is one of the best track choices for a climax like this. All death battles have climaxes, but only a few have you truly at the edge of your seat like this. Both we and the characters know that only one is making it out alive. All it takes is one good hit to seal the deal now. And the fight they have, each one slowly becoming more tired and hurt, and just barely avoiding death with every swing that their opponent makes is just beautiful. The kill itself is pretty okay, but with everything surrounding it, and giving you time to just let Sam's death sink in, it's all it needed to be. And of course, I can't forget to mention the "you're pretty good" part. Now, is this my favorite episode of the show? Nah, not quite. We still have quite a bit longer before we're able to talk about my favorite. But even then, this is what I'd call near perfection for this show. Of course, no episode of Death Battle is perfect or will ever be perfect. However, that doesn't stop this one from being a true highlight of not only Season 2, but the entire run of Death Battle. Finally, I actually got my Season 2 ranking done. That was quite a lot to go over, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it was so much fun to look over all of this again. I wanted to say a lot more on each episode, unlike how I did with my Season 1 ranking, where I just glossed over most episodes in that. But, in my defense, these ones have a lot more meat on their bones compared to the previous batch. So I feel I was able to say a lot more. As I said in that Season 1 ranking, I'm not entirely sure when I get into the show, but I do know that this is where I started to get obsessed with it. And Season 2 is easily the season of the show I'm most nostalgic for. So, it was a real nice trip through time watching all of these again. Is this my favorite season? Probably not. It definitely has some of the highest highs in the show's history, but looking at it as a whole, I think some of the later seasons, especially the more modern ones we're getting, are a little bit better. But still, it's a really great season. Next up, we got Season 3, the shortest season out of all of them. Nice little easy one after doing all that. It is also what most consider to be the weakest season of the show. And they're right. But I guess I'll see if it really was that bad when I rewatch it. Season 10 is almost here. We just got a really great trailer for it, and Ant-Man vs. the Atom got confirmed to be the premiere a few weeks ago. About damn time. We even got this neat little cipher wheel akin to Gravity Falls that people are saying might hint towards future matches we're getting. We still have about a month left of waiting until the premiere, so I might take some time to branch out to videos on other series that I'd like to do, and maybe go ahead and get the Season 3 ranking done. We'll just have to see. Thank you all for watching.